But something that I took away from like inquiry learning that's very different to traditional learning is the structure of a lesson. And this is, I think, what really drove me to create Sqwish, because structuring a lesson is something that any teacher can do. But how you decide that, I think, depends on whether you are going to teach it in an inquiry way or not.
Hello and welcome to Blooming Curious, a podcast that's all about nurturing that natural curiosity in our early years kids and students. I'm Edwina, your host from the Ed's Lessons blog, a passionate advocate for play and inquiry, and on a mission to keep children curious and questioning. The days of talk and chalk are over. We're diving into the world of integrated, inquiry and nature-based learning and exploring the strategies that create lifelong learners. So if you're a classroom or homeschool educator or even a curious parent, then this is the place for you. Today on Blooming Curious, I am chatting not to one, but two amazing educators. This is new territory for me, interviewing two people on the same call, and I'm really excited and just also a little bit nervous. So today I'm welcoming the creators behind Sqwish Resources, Allanah and Meg. Each of these ladies have over a decade of experience having taught in IB, PYP schools, which means they know a thing or two about inquiry-based learning. So welcome to Blooming Curious, Meg and Allanah.
Thanks. We're happy to be here.
So let's start off with both of you giving listeners some insight into who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be teaching in IB schools. So let's start with you, Allanah.
Yes, I've been teaching for over a decade, and during my time as a teacher, I worked overseas in London for the first couple of years of my career. When I returned to Australia, I worked in a few different private schools, both in rural Queensland and in Brisbane. I've taught all the grades, including nursery age kids at around 4 through to year 6. But I have been told many a time that I'm a natural upper primary teacher and really found my stride in sort of year 5 and 6, which is where I also fell in love with inquiry. I ended up in a school that is an IB PYP school, which is where I met Meg.
Meg, what about you?
So I had only ever taught in an IB school. So for my 10 years of teaching that I've done thus far, I've taught the PYP. I finished off my prac to the final year of my prac for uni. I also did at the same IB PYP school. So when people ask me, what's the difference? I can't actually say because I haven't taught in a non-IB school since, 2010, something like that. And that would literally only be as a prac student. So I actually don't know what I'm missing not missing, but do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's something that is so ingrained in how I teach. It's not anything out of the ordinary.
That's just part of who you are. Inquiry is just part of how you function, in other words.
Yes, she lives and breathes it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's chat a little bit about inquiry. So, Meg, obviously for you then, it's not like you were inspired or anything like that. You fell into this IB school, and IB schools, for those that don't know, are very much inquiry-based learning driven. So what did it mean to you when you started in this IB school and you had to teach inquiry? Did it come naturally to you? Did you struggle? What was your whole feeling about the whole inquiry?
I found it natural actually, because it's so, everything is linked. So like when I would speak with friends who were at other schools and that kind of thing, they go, we're doing this in science and we're doing this in HAS, we're doing this in maths, we're doing this in English. And I was like, well, ours is all kind of in together. Like obviously we teach English and math, but then for us, we would teach inquiry, which was some of our inquiries would have civics and fact and history and science all in the one sort of learning journey. So rather than having everything stand alone, it's quite natural to then have everything together. And if you're doing writing, it was all about the topic, like but not thematically. So it's not like we're doing, dinosaurs. So we're just writing about dinosaurs. It would be, you would maybe write an information report and that would be your genre for the term or the unit or that kind of thing. So it's very difficult to explain that sometimes if someone's never done it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That makes total sense to me, because that's, I guess, for me personally, although I've never really taught an IB school except for kindergarten, which I taught actually in an IB school in Dubai. But
oh, wow.
But not here in Australia ever. And that was a long time ago. So I also feel that inquiry is just a natural part of me, and it's just how I teach. So I see the links everywhere. But what about you, Allanah? Because you weren't IB originally, so you've actually had the experience in both IB and I guess we can call it a traditional school environment.
Yeah.
So what about you? How did you become involved, or how did your thinking really change when you started getting involved with inquiry in an IB setting?
I think because I taught overseas in London, and I know that this might not always be the case, but I found a really great school that I taught over there for 2 years, and I taught at that same school, and they were I wouldn't say they were an inquiry school, but they were very student-centered, and that was amazing to have straight out of uni. And I was very confused. Like, this is back in the day, but they didn't have textbooks. They didn't have many of the resources that I had come to rely on during my practice that I had seen my mentor teachers use. And I was very confused how they actually taught. So I had to sort of hit the ground running over there, and they used a lot of, like I said, student-centered, a lot of differentiation, a lot of student voice, just very naturally and that's sort of how I started teaching. And then when I returned to Australia, I was like kind of shocked to find that, the kids still got the maths textbooks out, and they turned to the next page and we would do the lesson, they'd do the worksheet. And I just really missed that student voice and essentially inquiry learning. I didn't know what it was. And I just thought, this is just Australia. We're backwards. And I hopped around a couple of schools due to moving and personal circumstances, and ended up teaching at the school where I met Meg, where it was a PYP IB school. And I do remember one of my very first lessons I had as an observation, my principal saying to me, you know what, you are a natural inquiry teacher. And that sort of hit me, because that's just my style and that's how I love to teach. And don't get me wrong, because when I fell into this school, I didn't have any training. And I thought inquiry meant sort of like, we're learning about space, write a question and go find out, and just like let them at it. And it was shocking what they came up with. So I really learned a lot while I was at that school, and really found my straps with it, and just the learning that was happening. Just when you nailed a lesson and the kids came out just with a buzz, because not only had they learned what you had intended them to learn, but they had driven it and they had voice in it. And I find that it's not hard to achieve in upper primary, but it's not the norm. So that's when I was like, we need more of this in more schools everywhere in our country, I should say.
I absolutely and 100% agree with everything you've just said. I think as inquiry teachers, we naturally all have that same feeling about, the child's voice and the integrating across the curriculum. So I don't understand, because life is integrated. I don't understand this whole teaching in separate boxes, which I actually really struggled with. It's not me, and I couldn't do it. So if we really define inquiry-based learning and what distinguishes it from traditional learning, Meg, what would you say? What makes it different? Is it just children's voice, or do you think there's something else?
It's a lot about getting a depth of knowledge rather than a breadth of knowledge. So really getting deep, rich meaningful, all of those synonyms that go within them. It's about getting all of that understanding in there rather than just knowing bits and pieces about everything. Like you can think about it in so many different ways, like especially with PYP, you talk about conceptual understanding and all of the approaching things in different ways. But yeah, so depth rather than breadth be my response.
Anna, what about you? Do you want to respond there?
I think if you were to define it, it would incorporate quite a lot. You know, we've talked about now breadth and depth over breadth, and then student voice. But something that I took away from like inquiry learning that's very different to traditional learning is the structure of a lesson. And this is, I think, what really drove me to create Sqwish, because structuring a lesson is something that any teacher can do. But how you decide that, I think, depends on whether you are going to teach it in an inquiry way or not. So for me, upper primary is very content heavy and very extremely content heavy. And you can't force children to have an interest in a topic they don't have an interest in, but we have to teach the curriculum. So this is where I think that inquiry learning has to become quite creative from the teacher, where you actually need to create the environment that ignites the curiosity, that creates the students to have these questions. And once you've got that, then that learning comes with the depth over the breadth, you know, like that's when they want to find out. If they don't want to find out, they're going to be forced to learn it and they're going to it's not going to stick. But, you know, igniting that curiosity and withholding answers until they want them is what I think is so beautiful about inquiry, because then you share the answers and they're like, yes, we finally have figured it out. Or, you know, even better, they come to the answers themselves. And that's all just about structuring your lesson, thinking about how am I going to get my students interested in this horribly boring topic that I have to teach because the curriculum tells me to. And then seeing what they come up with and guiding them to get them where we need to. So for me, it's less about chalk and talk and all those things, although there is a place for that within inquiry. It's making sure that our kids really have that drive to want to learn, because they do. We all want to learn something. I think even as adults, we all still crave learning something new. So for our kids are walking into class every single day, trying to get them excited is a big thing.
Yes, I've been actually talking about this quite a lot on the podcast, and that is about that desire to want to learn, that nurturing of the curiosity, because there is quite a lot of statistics coming out that shows that, yes, we are all born innately curious, but that curiosity wanes over time. So how do we keep kids curious then? How do we, and Allanah, you said that so beautifully, structure a lesson where we actually have to hook them so that they are interested in the topic or interested in the concept or what it is that we're trying to teach them. So I think that's what makes it different, is that we don't go in with just, oh, I've got to teach this today. It's more, oh, how am I going to hook these kids so that they actually want to learn what I have to teach? Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. And I think that's why inquiry lends itself so easily in the early years, younger years, because, you know, we really are just following the lead of the child. When they start getting older, you can see that sort of curiosity. They lose a little bit of that spark. I mean, I can't count the amount of times I've been in a class and said, right, we're going to do some maths, and then the collective groan in the class. So, like, it's just, you know, and that's the worst thing to hear as the teacher. You don't want that, because you just know that if they're already going in there with that mindset, what are the chances of them actually learning the thing that I need to teach them? So, yeah, I think nurturing that spark, not just in the early years, but continually through to primary, upper primary and beyond. That's the dream.
I wanted to add something. I had a lesson last year we were talking about, you know, that withholding answers until they actually want to learn about it. Year 5 class, the all boys, and we were doing decimals, percentages, fractions, all of that within number. And we were just placing, you know, some fractions, some decimals, some percentages along a number line and going, okay, how does this work? Blah, blah, blah. And they're going, oh yeah, well, we know that's equivalent, blah, blah, all that kind of thing. But watching them figure out, I think it was how 25% matches as how that turns into 25 out of 100 to then become a quarter. And watching their little faces, I remember them going, oh my goodness, is that how it works? Yes. And so the lesson was supposed to finish or whatever it was. And they're like, no, we want to have a look at the rest of them. And so by that stage, they actually wanted to know how it all worked.
How did you, in that specific lesson, what was the hook? Why did they enjoy learning about those fractions so much? What is it that you used?
I think, I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure we had a masking tape number line along the floor. And we had all of these little cutout. This is in grade 5, so not in early primary. We had just, I think it might have even been, we were talking about probability within this as well. And like just little post-it notes that had different things written on them. And so we were going, okay, where do these belong on the number line and that kind of thing? And then went, okay, how does this work? Like, let's line them up properly. And watching them go, oh, okay, so there's all my percentages and there's all my equivalent fractions and there's all my decimals and that kind of thing. And watching them go, oh, that doesn't fit there because those numbers don't line up and that kind of thing. So starting with manipulatives, so starting with stuff rather than just on the board.
That was just the word I was waiting for.
Manipulatives.
So people always think that manipulatives, whatever they are, whether they are counters, whether they are pebbles, whether they are something on a sticky note, that all equates to hands-on learning. And I think it's shocking that you don't even find them very often in an upper primary classroom.
Yeah, it's true. Yes. Well, not at, the IBPYP stuff we worked out with, but
I was going to say, really?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that you can take that example in many ways is that kids want to be involved. The alternative to that lesson would be that you drew with a number line or you had it projected on the board and you would say, right, kids, listen, this is how it's going to be. And you would stick it all up and you would show them straight away. And they would be like, yeah, whatever. Like, how is it going in their heads? But what Meg's done there is the children have things in their hands and they're talking about it with each other and they're trying to problem solve. And it's like less talk from you. It's way less talk from you. You just have to ask a couple of questions and give them the post-it note. Like that's the beauty of that situation.
Well, I think they are doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's how you learn. You learn by doing. I mean, we know this from our university studies. You learn by doing. Kids learn by doing. And then they get to year 3 and 4 and 5. And then we take away the manipulatives because now we think that they can now think abstractly. And that's such a huge mistake because they need those manipulatives. Even in upper primary. So that's an amazing thing. And I love that you said that, Meg. I went to a PD a couple of months ago with Kath Murdoch, actually. And she was speaking exactly about this, that she was in a class, and I think it was a year 3 class, if I'm not mistaken. And she was doing an activity with them, and there were no manipulatives in that classroom. So I think this is a really important point about inquiry, is that it is hands-on, and that children really need those hands-on manipulatives to show their understanding and to go through their thinking so that they get the concept. And so, Meg, that must have been an amazing lesson because obviously the kids didn't want it to end. And that's what inquiry is about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah. Now, Meg, how do you go incorporating student voice and choice? Why do you think it's so important in inquiry?
It lets students have, it's actually voice, choice, and then the third one that we use is ownership. So they have the voice, they have the choice, and they have ownership over their learning, and therefore they want to learn. Does that make sense? If you have ownership over a project that you're working on, then you want to be able to drive it in a way that so that you actually want to be successful.
The 3 of us are trying to do is to get everybody to do inquiry because we've seen what a fantastic strategy it is to get kids to love learning. But when we talk about student voice and choice and giving them ownership of their learning, which I think is so important, because it's only when you know that your results are because of what you've put in. What would we say to non-IB or non-inquiry educators when they're saying, well, we've got to drive the curriculum and this is what kids need to know? Where does student voice going to come in then? And so how do we say to these teachers that, hang on a minute, if you try this way, you might actually find you're going to be doing less work, perhaps?
See, I wouldn't say it's necessarily less work. I find that it's actually the pre-work is where you're having to do, like in our IB school, is even though we might be teaching a unit of inquiry, that kind of thing, say how the world works, we're still trying to teach all of the Australian curriculum descriptors for that year. So which makes it quite tricky if you are trying to make links. But if you're able to make authentic links to begin with, then you can use the curriculum, and rather than having that as an answer, is use that to ask your questions. Does that make sense? It's not free for all. It's very specifically the prompt or the hook. I'm trying to think of the word. Alana, you might remember what it is. Provocation. There we go. Provocation is so important to then drive the rest of your inquiry.
Because it's all that pre-work, as you say, the pre-planning, the figuring out the provocations, the figuring out the questions. But then once you're into that learning, the kids do the work. Alana, do you have something to add there?
Well, yes, because I've taught in both different types of schools. And this is where Sqwish was born for us, because, and this is why I coaxed Meg to come on, because she's such a gun at inquiry. But in our non-PYP schools, I think to become an inquiry teacher, I sort of had this natural way of teaching an inquiry method. But when I started teaching at this IB PYP school, I had training. You know, we had days out of the classroom to learn the IB PYP, how it works as a structure, how we do embed the curriculum in it. And it's very complex. You can't just do a quick PD online and you're done. No, it's ongoing and it changes every year. And for me, I thought, like, we can make inquiry so much simpler so that our everyday teachers, because then this is another thing that sort of drove me to want to do this, is my own children will not be going to an IB PYP school. And I want them to have just as good a learning as those kids who are in that school. So my endeavor is to make inquiry so much more accessible and easy for teachers who haven't had bucket loads of training. And this is where the idea for Sqwish came from. And it's just to try and make it easier. So yes, if you're going to teach a singular lesson on, I don't even know, anything, a singular standalone lesson, you can still make it inquiry. It doesn't necessarily have to be embedded across everything. That would be lovely. And it's great that there are schools that do that, and it's brilliant to work with them. But the reality is that most schools in Australia are not IB PYP schools. And so I want to find this middle ground where we can help teachers find an easy way to make learning so wonderful within their class, because it's just going to stick better for our kids.
I guess then, if you're thinking about that, helping non-PYP schools integrate inquiry into the existing lessons, would you agree that it would just be a shift in perspective?
Absolutely.
And then just questioning, getting the question right, because that's what it's about, the questioning, and then not jumping in with the answer, but allowing the kids to go through the struggle, which is not really a struggle, but to get the kids to go through that whole problem solving, hands-on, and finding the answer for themselves before you jump in.
It's just flipping the structure of your lessons, which is what I keep going on about, because I think that's one thing that teachers can control, is how they teach a singular lesson. Sure, they might not be able to embed it. So like we've been talking about, I think that, like how Meg was saying, you know, if you're doing a whole beautiful disciplinary theme unit, that's amazing, but it's just not the reality for most of our schools and most of our teachers. But one thing we can suggest that is easy is just following a structure that flips your lesson, where you firstly start with igniting that student curiosity. And then you let them explore, whether that's through manipulatives, through reading, through talking, through brainstorming, whatever it is. Let them explore that concept. Let them have that opportunity to voice their thoughts, make prior connections, have a go, fail, or not fail. They might already know. It might strike them, but you're holding back until they're literally like, tell us the answers, or, they've found them out themselves, and then they can practice. That's when the practice comes in.
Mm.
And then round it off at the very end with that reflection. And, and if they need to, a little bit more extension, a little bit more, delve a little bit deeper. And it's just, if we could just get teachers to follow that structure, I just think inquiry could be easier. And you don't have to do bucket loads of PD and know all the jargon that comes with PYP, IB. I mean, people listening to this might be like, what are they on about with all this IB, PYP stuff? Because it's so niche. It is.
Maybe we should just tell everybody that IB stands for International Baccalaureate, and PYP and PYP is the the primary years
program.
All those acronyms and all that jargon that Meg and I are across it, but it turns people away from it because it's like, I don't know what that's about. I know what I know, and teaching is one of those, jobs where you can't get ahead of the curve. Your to-do list is as long as it's ever going to be, and it's never going to get shorter. So how are they going to have that time to look into it, to research it, to find out those acronyms, to figure it all out, unless they have, support from their admin team and from their school? Is just not going to happen. So that's our dream with Sqwish, is to use, the 5E structure to help empower teachers in inquiry learning.
So you've just read my mind, because that was going to be my very next question. 2 things. First, you've got to tell people about Sqwish, and because you've mentioned it a few times. And secondly, inquiry is often driven by this inquiry cycle. And if people know Kath Murdoch, she has her inquiry cycle. Yeah. But there's also a different model of inquiry, which is the 5E model of inquiry. Now, with all your resources, now I'm just assuming, or maybe I shouldn't, is that you guys were probably doing were you doing the 5E model in your school?
No. Funnily enough, our school actually goes off the Kath Murdoch model. So we're tuning in, finding out, sorting out, making connections. I'm sure I've missed one in there somewhere. However, I find that cycle is less achievable in a lesson. I find it's great for a whole unit of work and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. However, if you're trying to go through that many stages in a cycle in one lesson, it can feel rushed and that kind of thing. So that's why for us, we've been using, to at least for our products, you call them products? Yeah. A lesson. Yeah.
Products.
We've been using the 5Es model. So that's what Allanah said before, where you engage, you explore, you explain, you elaborate, you evaluate, and then we've got extension in there as well. Obviously, that's added on a little 6E. But I was thinking back to, I know when Allanah tested or asked teachers to trial the original lessons, some of the feedback that she got was, but they need to know how to do that before you teach a lesson on that, before they do it. I'm going, well, yes, but not really. That's where you've got your engage and your explore phases for them to be actually curious about what they want to learn. And then you do actually tell them in the explain phase. That's what the explain is there for. Yep. You're not letting them go off on a complete tangent if they're trying to, learn about time, something like that. You are actually explaining it. It's just not the first thing you do.
2 things there. I remember on that course that I went on with Kath Murdoch just a few months ago, she actually also said that inquiry, of course, when you go through that cycle, it can be in a lesson, but that inquiry could go on for a term. It could go on for several terms, could go on for a whole year.
Yes. And I think that freaks other teachers out, I think if we start saying that then this whole open-ended, beautiful ordeal, when do I stop? And we are very confined by the curriculum. And I think that in an ideal world, yes, it would go on like Meg's beautiful lesson on percentages and equivalent fractions, etc. I'm sure she could have done more on that, but we are so, confined by time, especially in upper primary, because of how intense our curriculum is, that I think that idea when we start talking about how it can go on forever, and the Kath-Murdoch cycle is really great, like Meg said, in a unit. But I think that can be a bit of a deterrent to non-inquiry teachers. Like how long do I give my students then, and then it becomes a bit stressful. So we stuck to our 5Es model because it sort of wraps things up nicely. And then the idea with our extension task is never like an add-on task. It's usually delving deeper if you have the time and if you want to, or if your students really are asking for more. Our extension task always links back into the lesson.
Yeah, it's building on authentically what you've actually learned in that lesson.
And if you know that there's science resources called Primary Connections.
Yeah.
And they use the 5E model.
Mm-hmm,
and I think that's probably where I first came across the 5E model. And because they apply it throughout a unit of science. So whether it be, growth and change or whatever it might be, that whole inquiry cycle goes across that unit, which for me, that would be across a term or even 2 terms with growth and change. And if you were thinking about following, let's say, someone's sibling or with a little baby, you could actually go through that for the entire year that you were in that grade. So you can see how certain things naturally apply themselves to an extended inquiry cycle, whereas other things you could cover that in a lesson, like your fractions, for example.
Yes, and that is where I also first saw it in Primary Connections. But you are right; it does go over a unit, and we love the Kath-Murdoch cycle for a unit, but it does lend itself so beautifully to a singular lesson because it has that winning formula of, piking student curiosity. Why can't we do that for every lesson? Allows them to have a go and formulate their own questions. It then moves on to that explicit teaching, which I think that a lot of people don't think is inquiry if you don't know about it, but it is, because we do need to get the content across. And just like Meg said, it is the when that is important. It should be step 3, not step 1. And then, move on to the reflections and elaborations and the practicing of that understanding. That's pretty much what that cycle is. And a good lesson should also reflect that. So, and it makes it easy. 5 steps, beautiful. So for us, it's taking that inquiry, making it fun, making it easy, making it meaningful. And that's our motto. That's what drives us to help other teachers, achieve that goal.
It also lets students ask questions earlier on in the lesson cycle, because if they're holding on to these lessons until, do you have any questions right at the end before you're going to go out to lunch? Nobody's going to want to ask questions then. They want to go to lunch. Whereas if you're asking questions and actually, engaging them that way earlier in the lesson, they're more likely to have that ownership over it, like we were talking about before.
And in any case, between those 2 cycles, they dovetail. So it's very similar. But I loved how, Allanah, you've also just brought up another thing, because so many people, and you see it in the media all the time, and there's this whole new thing that came out with the government recently. Explicit instruction.
I was going to bring this up earlier.
Just think that if you're an inquiry person, we don't know how to do explicit instruction, or it doesn't exist in an inquiry classroom. And what nonsense. Explicit instruction, everybody, if you're worth your salt, knows that is how children learn, especially when you're teaching new concepts and new skills.
Oh my gosh, it's anything. Like if I wanted to learn how to sew, I can't just figure it out on a sewing machine. I need YouTube. I need someone to show me.
Your early years as well, like you're not just going to let them play with numbers. They need to know how the numbers work. They need to know how that the letters go together to make the words that have the sounds and all that kind of thing. There's definitely has to be a place for explicit instruction for them to learn
the rules of life.
But the way that you can do that is very different in that sole explicit instruction model versus in an inquiry model.
And the other place, of course, is that you're going to be teaching your writing, like your report writing or your narrative, whatever. You're teaching that explicitly. And then you're going to be using that, let's say, in upper primary or even from year 2, they're already writing reports. You're using those skills that you've taught them in an English lesson, for example, or in your guided writing lesson. That skill they're then applying to an inquiry project that they might be doing in science or in HAS or in whatever it might be.
This used to be my favorite unit in grade 1 that I taught for many, many years, is we would do Sharing the Planet, and it was living things. So, you're looking at their habitat, their diet, all that kind of thing. And so I honestly can't even remember. The curriculum's changed anyway, so I can't remember the descriptor. But we would spend a whole term going through all of the characteristics of living things. And then we would also be writing information reports. And the information report it's very, very simple at grade 1. But they're still having to find out information on a given animal and that kind of thing. It's not just standalone English. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so that's where that integration comes in.
Yeah.
Because now they're understanding that, okay, so this is how you write a report. And then they understand that I actually use this knowledge that I've gained when I'm applying it to writing about this animal or whatever it is. So that's where the integration comes in so beautifully.
Yeah, exactly.
Meg, you mentioned earlier with the 5E model that you've actually added on, what was it?
Extension.
Yeah. I'm assuming that would include reflection.
No, not necessarily. Your reflection would be in your evaluate step, in your last step. So before you would go on to it.
To the extension.
So you would go.
Extension is for us optional. It's an add-on. Because I have found, sorry, Meg, I'm totally jumping in here.
No, that's okay.
I have found in non-PYP schools that, fast finishes are a thing. What can I do once my kids have got through X, Y, Z, do some coloring, read a book? I need fast finishes. And it just frustrates me because if your children are finishing fast, if the students are finishing fast, then has their learning been deep enough? Are they rushing through their work? Are those pathways truly formed? On the flip side, are they taking care with their work? It's one of those two. It's either they're not taking any care with their work or they're not giving it enough time to sink in. And so for us, extension was important to add in there, as we would like to help other teachers who are not in an inquiry school. We wanted to show and add in our lessons that extension can be something to do with the task they've done to deepen their knowledge. So I'm trying to think of an example of one of our lessons. Meg, do you have one?
I've got one that I'm in the middle of writing at the moment. Which is
do that one.
The one, speaking and listening. It's about retelling stories and manipulating stories and typing. And so I'm looking at it. It's about fairy tales. The students for speaking and listening, they have to retell a story as part of a speaking and listening for report cards and that kind of thing. So you've got all 5 of the steps in the 5 E's. However, is for extension, we're looking at comparing and contrasting. How could you make different adaptations of the same fairy tale? Or can you use technology to tell the story in a different way? Or can you it out? Can you do, what can you do that's still to do with what you've done?
Applied in another way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Yeah. And I think we did one, I'm trying to think of one too. We did of area for grade 5 where the students jump out a square and then they measure it and they calculate the area. And if they're like, I'm done, I've figured it out. Well, then let's think about what else could we measure that isn't a square right in front of us. What if we were to measure the area of our classroom? And it's just asking more questions to deepen the understanding that they've just gained.
And it's also, can they apply the understanding that they've just gained?
True. To a different, context. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really important for us to include, even though it's technically not in the 5 E's. It's just to try and kill fast finishers.
Yes. Because I think we've got a blog post forming on why fast finishers suck.
That's also what you just mentioned there. As you said, you question, right? You ask more questions. And that's very much an inquiry mindset. An inquiry mindset is just you ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Just ask
and
more
that's
questions.
hard to do if you're not practiced in it. Like that's very hard to think on your feet.
Very hard.
And it can be when you have kids staring at you like, I'm finished. I don't know what to do. And they also, like I also have found students who are not from an inquiry classroom, they can then struggle to go deeper.
Yes, I was going to say that before.
Yeah. And it's hard as a teacher to think on the spot. Like you know, you've got so many things in your brain. You've got 10 minutes till lunch. You've got to get the marking done. You've got all this stuff going on. It's hard to think of those deeper questions. And so we are trying to do it in advance for teachers.
Listen, I think that so many of us, something that's always been with me since I was a kid, I think, but so many of us go through life and we don't really take time to reflect on our choices. And not just in our role as teachers, but just in life too. And what I love about inquiry is that it does make space for reflection. And even in the 5E model, it does that. Can you discuss the role of reflection and metacognition in inquiry-based education and how you support students in developing those skills in your 5E model? Is it the thinking about
big
thinking?
Question. I think the word metacognition is like setting off alarm bells for me because traditionally in the PYP there used to be your skills. So there were all of these different skills, and metacognition was one of the skills in the PYP. And you would sit there and go, "What on earth does that mean?"
Yeah.
Like you go, we're doing metacognition in this unit. Okay, sure. Like whatever.
What?
Google's it real quick.
Siri, hey Siri.
Yes, exactly. They've actually changed that now to, they're no longer called skills. They're your approach, the way that you approach your learning. If I think more on reflection. Reflection was always, again, I'm talking about the PYP, was its own standalone key concept. However, when they updated the PYP about 5 years ago, they realized that actually we don't want to have reflection as its standalone concept. We want reflection to be within.
Embedded.
Yes, exactly. Embedded within all of the inquiries. So it was interesting that the IB, like the International Baccalaureate, they reflected on their own practice and went, no, we actually need students and teachers and everything to be doing that authentically all the time, all of their lessons. Because it can be really hard to reflect authentically on your lesson as a teacher, but also to get kids to reflect on their learning authentically rather than just, oh yeah, I did a good job.
So why? How did you do that? What were you thinking around why you did that? How did you come about writing it this way? So I think that's that part where you get kids to take responsibility for their own learning. Is when they can start thinking about why they do things in a certain way, why they approach their learning in a certain way. And I think for teachers, you're so busy, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, oh, kids have left. Now you've still got your marking and 4 million emails and admin and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it doesn't leave space for us to actually reflect on how did I actually do today? How did the kids do today? Was I effective in what I did? Mm-hmm. Did they actually learn anything? Did they enjoy what they learned today? Did I learn anything? So I think that we need somehow to find a space as educators and as students for that reflection. Because otherwise, like I always say to kids, you guys, you can't go through like those little, and I always have to ask them because I never remember because of my menopause brain. What you call those guys in Star Wars, the little, they're like robot-y things that just keep marching. The droids. You can't go through life just being a droid, You have to actually look and say, oh, hang on a minute, how do I feel about this? Or what about this? And or what am I struggling with? Or what do I find easy? So I was interested in how you applied that through that 5E model, because it does make space for that, which is pretty cool.
I'm thinking as well, a very obvious plug for our business, we actually have a download that's for free, is a bunch of exit tickets that allow teachers and students to reflect on their learning for that lesson. Whether it's to collect it as a formative assessment, it's up to you. But by having that opportunity to reflect and, for want of a better word, making them reflect.
Yes.
Is really powerful.
It's a learned skill, and
you can't just expect them to have it.
Yeah, and we didn't call it reflection in our 5Es. It actually comes under evaluate, and it's meant to be at the end of the lesson. And you should really take 10 minutes at the end of your lesson. And if you don't have that 10 minutes at the end of your lesson because the kids are so into what they're doing, then you come back to it at the beginning of the next lesson. You have to make time for it somewhere. And it's something that we're trying. I think it's one of the hardest things about teaching because it is one of those things, sort of like formulating the question. It's hard to know what kind of reflection do you want from your children, from your students. And that's another reason we put these exit tickets together, because some of them are about making connections to their world. So like one of our exit tickets says, how would you apply what you have learned today to the world that you live in? Where might we see, Meg's example of the maths percentages and equivalent fractions, where might we see these numbers in the real world? They have to write down a quick sentence and they can go out to lunch. You know what I mean? It's that quick reflection. And with our exit tickets, that might not be applicable. It might be more a reflection on how well do I think I did this lesson? Did I communicate effectively with my peers? It might be an intrinsic sort of assessment on their skills of that, during that time. And I think it should be embedded into every lesson. That's the reason why we've offered those exit tickets up for free, because I think it's such an important thing for teachers and students to have.
I feel like it also allows them to cement their understanding and their learning into their brains, rather than just going, oh, look, we just finished maths. Off I go to lunch. Ask them when they come back, oh, what did you learn about? And I go, I don't know. So actually making them reflect helps them to make the connections within their minds as well. And so to hopefully commit some of it to memory.
And I'm just thinking, as you said that, you can just imagine you're getting to an end of a lesson and now the bell's about to go and now you want to still ask kids to reflect. It ain't going to happen, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yes.
That's why you have to...
Timing is everything.
Yes.
And so that's why actually flexibility is everything.
Yes.
Because that's when you have to think, well, next after lunch, I was going to do this and this and this, but actually we didn't quite finish there. And maybe you just have to can what you were going to do after lunch.
That's right.
That you actually can finish up and actually end that lesson properly and get that reflection in. And tomorrow's another day.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're so bound by the curriculum and our timetables that we forget about that flexibility, which is so essential when we're teaching young children, because their thinking and their time spans are not like our thinking and our time spans. And as we all know, everything takes longer working with kids, right? It's never what you think. Never going to be 30 minutes or 50 minutes. It's always going to be 2 days. So you may as well just plan for that.
Yeah, it's true. When I started teaching grade 3, and it was like, okay, great. End of grade 3, you basically got grade 4s. And then I moved from grade 3 to grade 1. And so at the beginning of the following year, you don't really have grade 1s, you have preps or, reception, foundation, whatever you want to call it. And I could not even tell you what the lesson was that I taught on my first day of grade 1, because it took like 3 sessions to finish off like an about me activity. Yeah. Like just the time it takes little people to do stuff. But also I'm reflecting that sometimes you think something is going to take them 20 minutes to do, even at a grade 5 or 6 level. But then they surprise you and it takes them, as you said, 3 days. Or something that you expected to be, really challenging for them to understand. And then they surprise you and it only takes them 20 minutes. The flexibility that you need is astounding. I've seen a meme go around where teachers make more split-second decisions in a day than what a brain surgeon does.
Oh, wow.
It's something ridiculous like that. That's why you're tired all the time.
Exactly. And then you still have to juggle everything else, right? Like little babies and all the rest of it. Listen, ladies, can you share a success story or an anecdote that demonstrates the impact of inquiry-based learning on student achievement and engagement? Think about some stories that could show just how amazing inquiry is and how kids have
I
done
would
so
say-
well with it?
I would say it's the fact that something that you might have taught in term 1, when one of the kids comes back in, say, term 3 or 4 and goes, hey, remember when we did this? So when I used to teach grade 1, one of the first units that we did was how we organize ourselves. And my lovely teaching partner at the time, she doesn't work at that school anymore. She's gone off to do fantastic things as a curriculum leader. We decided to expose the students to what it would be like if our classroom wasn't organized. So we trashed our classrooms. They had no idea. So these little grade 1s, it was like the second day of grade 1. And they walked in to tables turned over and, all the books were all over the floor. The blocks were everywhere. And it was just total mayhem when they walked in at the end of second break. And for them to experience that, this was the provocation, for them to experience total chaos and disorganization, for them to then make the connections to go, oh, well, this is why we need organization, was fantastic. So not just wasn't watching a video or that kind of thing. It made them feel disorganized and feel stressed and that kind of thing. And then that's how we could go, well, this is why we need to be organized. But then on the flip side, seeing those boys, like later in the year, they go, hey, Miss Anderson, remember when you and Mrs. Guy trashed our classroom? And you go, yeah, mate, that's what it looks like now, right? I'm like, yes, it does. Like, that's why we need to reorganize our. So, yes. And those little boys would be in what grade? Grade 7 or 8 now.
Oh, my.
They probably still remember it. They
exactly.
would. Yeah.
Yeah.
And aren't those the experiences that kids remember? They don't remember sitting at the desk. I mean, if you think back to your own school years, you don't remember anything about sitting at a desk and filling in a sheet of paper. You don't remember those things. You remember the hands-on stuff.
It's true.
Things that you were doing, you remember. Like I remember in high school dissecting a rat. That was the most fun I've ever had in my life. And looking for the scolex, the head of the tapeworm. It was awesome.
Yeah. See, I think I can remember sitting outside at that point.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not a biology person. Love science, not biology.
So those are the things I remember. Those hands-on things.
It's the experiences that stick with the students rather than, like, half the time, rather than the actual, rote learning. They remember the experience rather than what it was actually linked to. Like, those kids probably have no idea what we actually learned, like why we trusted the classroom. They just remember that it was trash.
But they would remember the feeling and they would remember the skill. Like they would have those skills from that lesson. Regardless of whether they really understood the curriculum behind it, it's still so valuable because it's just so memorable to them. That learning would be so deeply embedded.
So ladies, together you created Sqwish, which is an online company that provide digital resources to educators. I'd love you to share with the listeners why you started Sqwish. I think you've already alluded to it a bit during the interview, but why you started Sqwish and what's your mission with Sqwish?
Sqwish was born in my brain quite a few years ago now. I just believe that there's not very many brilliant inquiry-based resources for upper primary out there. The templates that are out there are either you need to know everything about IBPYP or a different inquiry model to be able to access, or they're just not designed very well. They're just a bit ugly. They're a bit, since I left the full-time classroom teaching, I have learned so much about the power of design and how a well-formed template can empower students to structure their thinking. Isn't that what inquiry is about? So to be offering resources to our students, I was either remaking resources or giving them such terrible designed resources that it just fell flat, and I knew there could be something more. So Sqwish for me marries a couple of loves, which is inquiry for me in upper years. Meg's jumped on board and I'm so glad she has, because she has so much more knowledge in lower primary. So, it can be transferred even further. I'm a fully trained graphic designer. So being able to create professionally designed resources that use the same fonts, styles, layouts. They empower students to become familiar with that resource type, which enables them to then predict how the resource is going to be set up, and it frees their cognitive energy to interpret the task they need to do rather than actually interpreting the task itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So Sqwish came about to kind of pull all of those things together. I want to help other teachers who are not an inquiry school and make inquiry learning accessible. I want to use design as a really powerful tool to help our students, help our teachers to get down to the nitty-gritty of actually learning. I think that a lot of the resources that are out there are not in education in general, are just not designed by professional graphic designers. And I want to ask why. It's such a powerful tool. And how many times do you have a worksheet that just has random clip art on it? For what reason? Images are so powerful. We have so many visual learners in our class. If the images aren't adding to anything, then get rid of them. It's just deterring away from what they need, which is just white space, like templated designs that help structure their thinking. It also makes learning so much more accessible. I have witnessed firsthand in upper primary where I've had maybe a student with learning difficulties, and I've had to sit down and create a very intense template for them to be able to access the learning that was occurring in my classroom. And then it occurred to me, if I'm doing this for one student, why can't they all have access to it? And lo and behold, the learning that came out from one particular lesson or a unit or whatever I was teaching was almost so much better because students could see I start here, I end here. And I could just see the power of this and how it could just free our students more cognitively, help those who struggle with structuring their ideas, their learning. And that's why Sqwish was born. I walked away from a full-time classroom position to basically upskill in graphic design so that I could achieve this. And the resources that we have on the site, we pour so much time and energy and love into them because I want them to be perfect, because often it's not perfect in a classroom. You have to make do. And I don't think that's good enough.
Meg, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Alannah's just about said it all. I know I found when you log on to another website to go, okay, I need something maybe to support how I'm going to teach probability. And you log on, and half the time the stuff that you download is just rubbish. Like you have no idea you can only use half of it. Like you might go through a PowerPoint or that kind of thing and go, well, that's rubbish. Why would I teach that? They already know that. Or you download something and you go, I don't actually understand what they want me to do with it. So that's what we are making it's a whole lesson. So if you were to download one of our lessons, it'd have a full lesson plan within it that goes through the 5E steps. It has what you need to do, some prior, like any teacher preparation, any information that you need, all of that kind of thing. It's all Australian curriculum aligned. So you know that you're ticking off the right kind of things that you need to teach. It would have templates for students to work on. It might have posters. It might have a PowerPoint to work through. It might have a game. There's all sorts of things that we've put in basically all of the effort to enable you to teach that content descriptor to the best of your ability in an inquiry way as well.
I love how Sqwish, just like Blooming Curious, I think it supports educators to try and lessen the load for educators and also to give them quality resources, because as you said, there's so much rubbish out there. And I found children love something really beautiful. They love working on something really nice. And so why would you just give them some horrible blurry thing to do a task? I think that's really important, and kudos to you guys.
Thank you. That's what Allanah and I spoke about a few weeks ago when we were getting ready to launch our business and all that kind of thing. Look, we were wondering how much time actually went into each lesson that we've created. And some of them have actually taken about 40 hours to create one lesson that's give or take about an hour. But as a teacher, I don't have that time to be able to create such a wonderful resource for my students. I'd love to, but I also need to, eat and breathe and tweet. We're trying to take the jargon, Alannah's favorite word, the jargon and the question out of what do I actually need to teach this lesson? What's their enduring understanding? What do I need? And what can I get rid of that's going to be like white noise for them?
Yeah. And we really look at a lesson, and I'll write one and then send it to Meg, and she'll say, do you need that? Do we need this instead? And, I think we also need posters, and I also think we need this. And then it just becomes this big thing. We've just tried to think of everything. So you download something about, I don't know, you need to teach subjective and objective language and bias. We've thought of everything. There's posters, there's a student template, it's digital, it's print, it's whatever is going to work in your classroom. We just want it to have thought of literally everything, because often when you're teaching, you just can't. You just throw some stuff up on the wall that you've just done really quickly. You've written it up before on a blank piece of paper before recess and run out. We've just really tried to think of everything to make it easier.
I know, Alannah, I can't remember if you said it already today, was that when you did some supply teaching and you said just the dribble that the kids were having to do was pretty atrocious. So if you're giving them that real quality lesson and understanding, then you're going to engage them and they're actually going to want to be there as well. And, they might be able to learn something in the process.
Just to finish off, just tell people where they can go to get hold of Sqwish's resources.
We have a website up. It's sqwish.com.au. All our resources are up there. We don't have a lot because we are about quality, not quantity. However, one day we do hope to have many up, catering for lots and lots of grades, but we can only do what we can do when we are really honing in on that quality. You can find our resources on there. We're also on Instagram as Sqwish_resources on Instagram, and the same on TikTok. And we've just started a Facebook. I think that's just Sqwish though, isn't it, Meg?
Yes, that one's just straight Sqwish.
I will put the links to your website and Instagram and everything onto our show notes so that listeners can go there very easily and click and go and look at your wonderful resources. And to finish off, what advice would you give to educators who are just coming into inquiry-based learning? What would you say to them?
I would say be patient with yourself, continue to reflect, and just enjoy the ride. It's wonderful. And ask other teachers, ask the teacher next door if you can sit on their lesson. Go and see how other teachers are doing it, even if you have to sacrifice some of your beloved planning time. It is so, so worth it, because that is how I have grown as a teacher the most, is having an open door and walking into other open doors within the school. Not everyone's door is open, but find those teachers who have that open door and learn as much as you can from them.
Meg?
I was going to build on what Alannah said and say that there's not actually many wrong ways to teach inquiry. There's lots of right ways to do it, and your way of doing it might be different to the person next door, and that's okay. It's not as hard as you think it is.
Absolutely true. It's not one way of doing it. You find your own way of doing inquiry that fits with you, with your personality, and with your cohort of students.
Because you could have a way of inquiry that works really well for one cohort, and then the next year it doesn't at all, and you have to really rethink the wheel anyway.
So Meg and Alannah from Sqwish Resources, I think this has been a wonderful opportunity to chat to you both. I'd like to thank you both for coming on Blooming Curious, and I look forward to us perhaps meeting up again at a later stage, and I wish you all the very, very best with your business with Sqwish Resources. And I hope everybody goes there, and also to Blooming Curious, and go and have a look and see how the ladies at Sqwish can actually help lessen your load in your classroom. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having us. I had such a great time. It's always nice to talk about your why and your passion. So we've loved it. Thanks, Edwina.
Yes, thank you.
So that was Meg and Alannah from Sqwish Resources. I'll leave links in the show notes for you so that you can go and check out their website. And if you enjoyed this episode today, why not share it with someone that you think might like it too? And with that, I will love and leave you until next week, same time, same place. And until then, stay blooming curious.